My name is Soyica Colbert, and I am a Vice Dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. This series, Such a Time as This, Racial Justice in the University, emerged in response to the racial violence, specifically anti-Black racism, that unfolded this summer and continues to unfold. By drawing attention to our faculty's longer consideration of racial justice and the university's role in advancing it, we will explore how the work of the university may be mobilized for such a time as this. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today and our conversation, which will focus on how art intersects with racial justice. Just 2 housekeeping notes. Unfortunately, we'll have to end a little bit early today. So if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen so we can make sure that we get to them. Also, please note that this series will continue throughout the month of October, and we hope that you will continue to join us next week and in the following weeks. And so now to our speakers. Our first speaker today is Carlos Simon. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Performing Arts at Georgetown. Hailing from Atlanta, Georgia, his work ranges from concert music for large and small ensembles to film scores with influences from jazz, gospel, and neo-romanticism. Simon was named as one of the recipients for the 2021 Sphinx Medal of Excellence. The Sphinx Medal of Excellence is the highest honor bestowed by the Sphinx organization, recognizing extraordinary classical Black and Latinx musicians. In 2018, Simon's latest album, My Ancestor's Gift, was released. Also in 2018, as a part of the Sundance Institute, Simon was named a Sundance Time Warner Composer Fellow. Simon has been commissioned for so many works I can't keep track, including the Philadelphia Orchestra, Washington National Opera, and Reno Philharmonic. Acting as music director and keyboardist for Grammy Award winner Jennifer Holliday, Simon has performed with the Boston Pop Symphony, Jackson Symphony, and St. Louis Symphony. His string quartet, Elegy, honoring the lives of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and Eric Garner, was recently performed at the Kennedy Center. He has also toured internationally with Angie Stone, Grammy Award nominated artist Angie Stone, throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia. Our second speaker, Natsu Power, specializes in adapting non-dramatic texts in new works in visual theater and directs plays. Her original work in writing, adapting, and directing includes Thumbelina at Imagination Stage, The Lathe of Heaven at Spooky Action Theater, Alice in Wonderland with National Players, Wind Me Up Maria, a go-go musical at Georgetown University, which I hope you have all seen and enjoyed, Astro Boy and the God of Comics at the Studio Theater and Company One Theater in Boston. Her other directing credits include Provincetown, Tennessee Williams Festival, Oni Theater Center, the Studio Theater, Baltimore Center Stage, Mosaic Theater, and Theater J. She is the recipient of 2 Elliott Norton Awards for Outstanding Direction and Production Design, 2 Helen Hayes Awards for Outstanding New Adaptation and Outstanding Set Design, as well as a DC Commission, actually 2 DC Commission in the Arts Fellowships. Onoda Power holds a PhD from Northwestern University and is the author of God of Comics. She is a professor in theater and performance studies at Georgetown. So let's begin with a response to a broad question. Carlos and Natsu, please tell us about your research and how does your research advance racial justice? Carlos, please begin.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here, and I'm just delighted to share just a little bit of my work with you all. And yeah, so I am a new faculty member at Georgetown, and my work to date has commented, if you will, on social justice issues and historical events in a musical way. And so I'd like to use this forum to talk about my latest piece, which comments on the university's role on slavery, namely the GU 272, which the university has done tremendous work on and developing, not only archival materials, but also, just done a lot of work with the community and the descendants. And so, the work that I'm doing, I see as an extension to just the tremendous work that so many have already done. One of the things that I really sort of grappled with as I was interviewing for the position as assistant professor is the university's role in slavery. And as a composer who, I wanted to write a piece, a large scale piece that sort of honors the enslaved, and just to really, really dig deep and to understand the history. And so one of the things that I've done in collaboration with Professor Adam Rothman and Professor Bernie Cook is just to really dig into archives and look at the bills of sale and just the history, the aspects of what happened. We traveled to the plantations in Louisiana and Maryland, just outside of Baton Rouge. We just went and just kind of talked to some of the descendants there, and I got a sense of just how incredible the history is there, and that in turn it helped me sort of write the piece. And over the summer, I had an opportunity just to kind of dig deep with that. And so the piece is, I'm taking a traditional form called the Requiem. Those of you all know the Requiem is a mass for the dead, which is a traditional form of the Catholic Church, Jesuit tradition. And it's Mozart, Gabriel Fauré and Berlioz. These are composers who've all used this art form for sacred purposes. And so I'm using the art form to tell the story of the enslaved. And so I'm collaborating with Georgetown's hip hop artist in residence, Marco Pave. He's acting sort of as a griot and telling the story. And I'm also collaborating with a small intimate ensemble. Traditionally, the Requiem is a large piece and has an orchestra of about 80 people and a large chorus, about 40. So it's a massive piece, but I'm choosing to change it and to create like an intimate space. And so I'd like to share just a clip of just my collaboration with Marco Pave and commenting on these. So this is a short clip.
I am no minister of malice. I will not strike the fallen. I will not repel the repentant. But may my right hand forget its cunning, and my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I forget the difference between the parties to that terrible, protracted, and bloody conflict. A conflict between people who would rather kill millions of humans than see the humanity of the enslaved. A conflict for both scared and brave. A conflict for justice, or a conflict that left just us. Why don't you go back to Africa, they ask. I don't think my brothers will be willing to treat you fairly, seeing that you were property and now you're owning property, speaking properly, possibly seeking revenge, unhinged, deranged, crazed, in a daze, miseducated, and misbehaved. There must be a way for your humanity to be recognized elsewhere. And that's what the good side had to say to my ancestors. May we grant them a higher reward than recognition of their humanity from barbaric humans. May we grant their struggles deeper understanding. May we grant the wishes of the enslaved. May we dismantle the system built upon their backs. May we give eternal life to the souls with beaten flesh. May we grant my ancestors favor, spiritual immunity, and may we grant them rest.
Thank you. Yeah, and it gives me chills every time I hear it. And so like really, it's two reasons why I want to really explore this. Is, you know, one, to really honor, you know, my ancestors, you know, and just to really give them due, because, you know, the university is indebted to their sacrifice. And so as a part of the community, I want to just honor them, but also show, you know, how slavery is so deeply embedded into our American culture and our society, and how it's inextricably linked to racism, systematic racism here in this country. So there are more clips, you know, but at the time is of the essence, and I want to, you know, talk more about it. But just in my introduction, this is a small clip of introduction of the work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. That was lovely. And I can't wait to dig into some questions around your methods and how it intersects with Natsu's work. But before we go there, Natsu, could you please just share a little bit about an overview of your work and how it relates to racial justice?
Thank you. Carlos, I'm so moved by your piece. And can I say something a little bit before I share my work? Is like, I think what we do is a little bit similar. We take texts and adapt them through our practice in a new context and give it a new layer of meaning and to reach new audience and hear it in a new way. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. Okay. So I'm going to screen share my PowerPoint. So as I will do that. Okay, so as, and thank you, Soyica, for introducing my work. As she has already mentioned, my work, so this is a new way in which I'm describing my work lately, is that I work with text and adapt them into original works of visual theater, but I sometimes direct plays as well. So my work has been very visual. This was adapted. This was staged at Georgetown. It's a production called War with the Newts. It was based on a science fiction novel by Czech novelist Karel Čapek. I'm just going to speed through some of these things. This is the Astro Boy and the God of Comics, a production in Boston that I did. My work tended to be very multimedia centered, and also combining low tech and high tech multimedia. So these are actors drawing on stage. I'm also very interested in puppets and small crafts, and I usually make most of the objects that are used in my productions. And this is a newly discovered Tennessee Williams play that he wrote in college, and this was the first production of it. This was just last year in Provincetown Tennessee Williams Festival. It's called The Lady from the Village of Falling Flowers. And I make all the puppets as well. And this was a production that we did at Georgetown in collaboration with Spooky Action Theater in DC. It's it was adapted from a novel by Ursula K. Le Guin, who passed away during this rehearsal process. So it was a poignant moment for us all. The most meaningful project that I've ever done in my life, I think, was Wind Me Up Maria Go-Go musical, which I staged at Georgetown in 2016. I've been a fan of go-go music since I've moved to DC, which is, I don't know if our audience is familiar with, actually, did I just, do something? Okay. But it's a music genre native to DC, practiced and consumed primarily by DC's African-American communities. And I've loved this music since I moved here, and I wanted to bring it to Georgetown. So I worked with my friend, Charles Garris, also known as Shorty Corleone, who was at the time a singer in one of the most prominent go-go bands, Rare Essence, in DC. And he's now since moved on to his own productions and not so much singing with Rare Essence anymore. But so we had about 20 musicians from DC's go-go communities and working with about 20 student cast plus young performers from DC public schools. And it was a huge collaboration and a really meaningful experience for all of us involved, and with some uncomfortable moments of, you know, cultural understanding and but very, very productive. And so because Shorty and I had such great time creating this work, and our goal was to make a product that is that transforms the space that it's in just by existing. You know, when you think about how theater affects the world, we think about, oh, it educates the public, you know, it gives audience new story, but we wanted to go beyond. We wanted it to automatically just transform the space just by existing. So it doesn't matter how conventionally successful the product is, just by it existing, it changes the space, and which I think this work actually did. It brought so many people to Georgetown into the Gonda Theater at Davis Center who would not think to step into this space otherwise. It was sold out for the entire duration of our 2-week run. And Georgetown Gonda Theater became a kind of a different community space. People from the community sharing space with Georgetown students and laughing and singing and dancing together. So actually, so Shorty and I wanted to do another go-go musical, and when we were thinking about what it should be, I had the idea of writing a go-go musical that takes place in Japan, which is where I'm from, which is a very strange idea. But I thought of doing a go-go musical that takes place in Okinawa in the 70s, late 70s and early 80s, the height of go-go. Because at the time, so many Americans in the military was stationed, or rather were sent to Vietnam and would stay in Okinawa. And I talked to, I had a chance encounter with a Uber driver who had that experience of being stationed in Okinawa and talked about it very fondly. And he had grown up in DC, and we also talked about go-go music, and that was the start of my project. But once I set my foot in Okinawa, the project transformed completely. There's a very active protest against the US military presence there, which is still going on today, has gone on for the last 20 years. They have a sit-in every day, 3 times a day in front of a marine base, newly constructed marine base. And the way it happens is that the residents do a sit-in and the police would physically remove them 3 times a day. And it stays to very peacefully and ritualistic, but every single day. So I've participated in this protest and then have been removed more than a dozen times. Soyica saw me be removed through Zoom conferencing. Okinawa is also still full of unexploded bombs from World War II. And this is construction workers detecting the bombs for new construction. So every time you build something in Okinawa, you have to detect for bombs. Otherwise you might die building the house. And this is a bomb that has been dug up just in the last, I mean, this was in March while I was there. So the play has taken in a new direction, and in this climate of pandemic, because I can't actually write and direct a play that has an audience at this moment, the play was going to have a workshop at the Studio Theater in July, which of course didn't happen. So I'm exploring different themes of the play in the form of little video essays that's very quick to make. And with the idea that I'll eventually adapt them into a live performance with the audience. So this is a still from a video sketch that I did. It's framed as a cooking show, of this dish called taco rice, which is an Okinawan dish in which Spanish, American, Mexican, Japanese, and Okinawan traditions are combined on a plate. It's basically taco meat on rice. But that idea in itself is such a mix of different cultures, and it has so much to do with migration and colonialism. Here is Soyica acting as my dramaturg in the video clip. So it's essentially me cooking taco rice and Soyica asking questions about it and through Zoom, and my answering questions, and different elements of cooking stand in as symbolic gestures toward historical information. So the spices that I'm toasting acting as different weapons that were used in the Battle of Okinawa. And also, this is kind of a gruesome detail, but the taco meat that's being cooked, standing in for all the people that lost their lives in the Battle of Okinawa. And working on this project really made me reflect on where I stand in the issues of racial justice. I live in the US as a woman of color, and I think about that a lot, and I think of myself, I have categorized myself on the side of the oppressed most of my life, right? And then, however, in the context of Okinawa, as a woman, as a mainland Japan born person who currently live in the US, I am the oppressor. My present day happiness is predicated on, in however indirect way, on the suffering of the Okinawan people. So I've really, I've had to reevaluate my stances and really thought of how it was just a huge revelation when an Okinawan artist asked me the question, like, how would you, as a mainland born person living in the US, tell the story of Okinawa? And I think that's a question that we can all think about as artists, how we may simultaneously be oppressor and oppressed. And I was blind to that all my life, because if only the oppressed would feel the effect of the oppression, right? So I was not feeling it, not because it didn't exist, but because I was on the side of the oppressor. And so I'm staging the scene of the protest as a chess game in my virtual theater environment. So these are chess pieces that I've been making. These are trucks that come into the construction site, which I recreated with little wood pieces. So that's what I'm working on. So in the age of non-live theater, I'm making theater on my desktop.
Thank you, Natsu, and thank you to both of you for your presentations. There's so many threads that have come together, and we're already getting questions in the chat. So I want to engage both with the questions we received and the things that you've already said. So both of you mentioned how you see this work as engaging with your positions at Georgetown, Carlos specifically with the history of the 272, and the idea of the Requiem, and Natsu, you talked some about bringing communities together through your work on Why Me Up Maria. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you see your work and how you see yourself positioned in this work as a faculty member, specifically at Georgetown. The title from our series, For a Time Such as This, comes from scripture, from Esther. And part of what the scripture tries to get at is, what are the responsibilities for people who are placed in power? And one could argue that being a professor at a Research One university gives you access to certain resources and certain power, even as we are also people of color. And so I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, and perhaps Natsu, you could expand on what you said at the end about how you see yourself positioned in an international context. So maybe Carlos could respond, and then Natsu.
Sure. Well, yes, I recognize my privilege as a professor, and but I wasn't always a professor. I am first a Black man in America, and so I grew up on the south side of Atlanta, and I know the woes of being poor. I know the what it's like to be oppressed, and I know the and now, like the ideals of systematic racism. And, you know, I've made a point to use my platform to talk about these things on using the platform that I have, which is music. And so, and as a professor, you know, at Georgetown University. So I really see myself as ambassador, if you will, and just sort of opening the discussion through the vehicle of music. And this project is really meant to, again, talk about the systematic racism that comes from slavery, you know, and how it's morphed into Jim Crow and redlining and prison incarceration. And it's just, you know, a mountain of things of evolution, and how slavery has really evolved in this country. And we have to go back to the source. And so, you know, the university has done tremendous work in understanding its role in slavery. And so, you know, this is just an extension of that.
Thank you. And just to add a piece on that, Natsu, we just got a question that came in from Donna Cameron that asked, why does Natsu see herself as an oppressor? And so maybe you could give some clarification in or response to that bit and to what I had offered.
Okay. Where should I start? Should I address that question first,
Sure.
perhaps? I think while it's fresh. So the problem is that I didn't see myself as an oppressor, right? Well, I see myself now as an oppressor now that I have learned the history of Okinawa in relationship to the US and mainland Japan as well. So Okinawa was an independent country which was colonized by Japan in the 18th century. And it had its own language and culture. And then it was invaded and colonized by Japan. And now it's considered part of Japan. It had encounters with the US a number of times through history, most prominently in 1945 in the Battle of Okinawa, and during which a quarter of all Okinawan residents lost their lives. And it still is heavily occupied by the US, although the formal occupation ended in 1972, if I'm remembering correctly. Sorry if I misspoke about the year. And still 10% of all Okinawan land is US bases, which is I think 80% of all US bases in Japan. So it's really disproportionate to how much land in Okinawa is given to the US in comparison to all mainland. And there are problems that come with the US occupation in this way. There's a lot of noise pollution, and also the new construction that's happening now in Henoko Bay that the residents are protesting against. Henoko Bay is home to so many endangered species, and so environmentalists as well as residents who are concerned about their well-being are protesting against it. But the Japanese government hasn't stopped this construction. And a part of the issue, this is, you know, my background knowledge about this is really since, you know, I've been reading about this only for a year, and there are lots of people who can speak more authoritatively about this. But because of the Japanese government's relationship with the large construction companies, it's creating jobs for the large construction companies. And by the way, US bases in Japan are paid for by the Japanese government, not the US military or US government. That was the agreement that was signed after World War II because Japan lost the war. So there's inequality in all parts, and people in mainland Japan can live peacefully without numerous US bases on their land because it's all in Okinawa. So they're benefiting from the suffering of the Okinawan people, and the US is able to have a base in Okinawa for wars that are going on, not in that area, but far, right? So that's how I see myself as an oppressor. And from what I've, the Okinawan people, a lot of Okinawan people do see themselves as oppressed by the mainland and the US. So that is, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for that helpful historical context for the geopolitics. And so, you know, that's sort of a big picture question around the work that both of you are doing through these projects. But audience members and I am curious too about your process. And so 2 questions have come in that I think relate to process. One from Mike Dene that asked about your collaborations with artists, activists, historians. Can you talk about how you cultivate those relationships, what challenges they pose? Both of you travel to Okinawa, Natsu. Carlos, you traveled to Louisiana to talk to descendants. And so maybe thinking some about what you learned and how you cultivated those relationships. And then a more specific question for you, Carlos, if you, from Shannon Mulligan, again about process, asks, were you able to consult any of the primary sources in the special collections with regards to your work? So,
Yeah, sure. So,
go ahead.
So I'll start with one of the things that I made a point to do is to really collaborate with Professor Adam Rothman, who's done tremendous work with, you know, transcribing some of the archives, the bills of sale, and some of the records there. And one of the first things that I did upon being hired is go to visit the archives in the library there, and just to sit with the materials and just to see just the raw materials. And so that was one collaboration. Artistically speaking, you know, collaborating with Marco Pave, you know, I had sort of relinquished, you know, I gave him this is what I want, this is where I'm going, it's the vision here, and he sort of took it and ran with it. And so as a composer and a collaborator, you know, I think it's important to kind of relinquish some artistic control, and that's fine, you know. Ultimately, the story, it's about the story, right? And being able to tell it in the best way possible. And so I collaborate not just with Marco, but also the musicians who are involved. You know, they live in Boston. The ensemble is named Hub New Music, and they're known for just presenting contemporary classical music. And so, you know, because of COVID, we had to collaborate via Zoom and just kind of try ideas out. And so, you know, the collaboration is such a huge part of my creative process. I don't like writing anything in a vacuum, because that's, you know, because my view is limited. You know, I think when you extend it to other people, then it becomes broad. So in a nutshell, that's the answer, you know, the collaboration from different perspectives.
Thank you. Natsu?
Well, theater is inherently collaborative, right? Like you can't really make work of theater by yourself in your house, although I'm doing that now. That's part of the reason that I think what I'm making now is not quite theater. I'm using my skills in theater and making something different. But so collaboration really is the reason why I'm practicing in this art form, and it really does. Without that, none of my projects will exist. Collaborating with my friend Shori Colioni on Why Me Up Maria was such a life-changing experience, because we practice in 2 completely different fields. Shorty had not even seen a play before he collaborated with me on this, but we had known each other because I was a fan, and he had also like we had known each other personally before, and then we decided to put our strengths together and write a musical. And we had really productive personal conversations during the process that fed into the play and the process. Like, for instance, one of the uncomfortable conversations actually we had was around the use of the N-word in the go-go songs. I was deeply uncomfortable with it, and I questioned Short, well, do you want to put this on stage? And for him, because he has been practicing music in the go-go community, so he hadn't encountered the controversy, in the way that I have been experiencing, and I was very uncomfortable, and he had educated me on how he's using the words, but then I questioned him. Sorry, my dog is going ballistic. But then I questioned him, these are students at Georgetown University that are my primarily white Georgetown student cast who are going to be uttering these words. And then we had a long and productive and uncomfortable and also really meaningful conversation about it. And we wrote a scene about it in the play. So this is how collaboration and personal histories really feed into the process and transform the product. And in terms of the Okinawa project, I think of my work with the protesters as collaboration. And I think in a really mutually transformative way. The sit-in happens every day, it's happening today, but the audience for it is limited, right? So there's no really audience for it because it's a protest, it's not for, it's the protesters and the police and the construction company. But I've done a Zoom streaming from the protest to a small audience in the US while I was there. And that actually transforms the space of the protest as well. It's gaining new audience, new interest. So that's the kind of collaboration that I would like to really harness and embrace. Like just by the collaboration happening, it's changing the world in some way.
Thank you. And so we're running short on time, but I have one sort of big question that I hope you at least can give us some insight into before we have to log off. And so the question is, given the multiple crises we face over the summer, COVID, as well as the attention to structural inequality with regards to race, how has, and you've already said this but how has this context of COVID and our attention to racial injustice changed the work that you're doing? And how do you think, what do you think it portends for the arts moving forward?
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and start. It's a, in the classical concert space, if you think of it, it's really a space that was meant for the elite, right? People who had money, and you go to a concert, a symphony concert, for instance, you're going to see people get dressed up, and you're not going to see as many people of color, honestly, in this space. And so COVID, in a way, has changed so many different things about the presentation, and as well as in, this confluence of what's been happening in the news of George Floyd, and so this has left a lot of organizations trying to, get audiences, back, and so in a way it levels the playing field, and everyone is now able to enjoy music on this level of being online, and can come in their own clothes, but the other side of this is you have the New York Times posted an article about how orchestras are now including composers that are compositions by Black composers and Latinx composers to be diverse in their musical offerings. And so it's like a change in, I think, the musical landscape based on these two events that have really shaped things this year. Well, and the title of the article is "Will It Last?" Will we continue this after things have sort of panned out? And I hope so. I do hope so.
Thank you. Natsu?
Yeah, the idea of accessibility is kind of a powerful thought, right? Like if we can take something positive out of this pandemic, it's put performing arts into the living room or studies of people who may not otherwise go to these venues dressed up. One question that people always ask is like, how do we survive this moment in the performing arts, or will theater survive? I think, I believe survival is a given. There's no two ways about it. Like, it's going to be here regardless. It's going to transform. Are we going to like the way that it transformed? I'm not sure. I who's going, but I think that this is a great opportunity to transform the practice of theater, which has not been equal access and representation has not been the strength of American theater. And if we harness this moment to make it as such, then I think that's a positive transformation. And in the meantime, I'm really interested in trying, not in trying to do the thing that we were doing before, but doing the things that we would only do at this moment, because this will end and we will never make theater in this way again, right? So I'm making little chess pieces in my little studio, and I will probably not do that after the pandemic, but I'm just embracing this moment and trying to make the best.
So unfortunately, we have many questions that we were not able to get to. One was about your beautiful chessboard, Natsu, and whether or not it was part of a set or part of just your beautiful life. So I'm glad you spoke to that. But for now, I want to robustly thank Natsu and Carlos for sharing some of their work with us. I hope that all of us will have a chance to engage with it once we're in person again, but certainly in the virtual environments that they're creating online through their art. And I also want to ask our audience to return to be in conversation with us again next week. We'll have our full hour and hopefully we'll be able to get to more of your questions. But for now, I want to thank you so much for this conversation and wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.